Hey everyone, welcome to the June edition of Digital Analytics Wednesday Singapore. So we will be waiting for more people to join. So we're going to start maybe in 5-10 minutes. So maybe just wait for a while. So maybe just to give a quick introduction in terms of what Digital Analytics Wednesday is. So Digital Analytics Wednesday Singapore is an event where it's a platform where digital professionals come together and to share knowledge and to learn from each other. So today we have speakers from Shopee, Mero, and Salesforce joining us this month. The first session will be shared by Chiman from Shopee. He will be sharing on how he actually helped FavePay to go mainstream by using data. The second session, we will be having Vincent from Salesforce, who will be sharing the 7 deadly sins of marketing analytics. Last but not least, we also have a demo session by Mero, led by the co-founder of Mero, Pavel. So just hang out for a while, and we're going to start once we have about 50 participants. Hey everyone, welcome to the June edition. We're going to start in a while. Today we're going to start with having speakers from Shopee, Mero, Salesforce. Our first speaker is Chiman from Shopee, who will be sharing on how he actually used data to help FavePay go mainstream. So just a bit of background, FavePay was started back then in January 2017. It had less traction for about 4 months. So Chiman will be actually sharing with us how he actually used data to play an important role in the growth of FavePay. So Chiman, I'll pass the floor to you to share on how you actually use data to help FavePay to go mainstream.
Thank you, Shiyun, and thank you to the Google team for this opportunity. Right, so just give me a bit and let me share my screen with all of you. Right. So hopefully all of you can see all my screen. Right. So yes, the topic of today is how FavePay went mainstream. Right. I know the introduction says I'm from Shopee, right? So many of you may be thinking, well, is this guy from Shopee talking about Fave? So maybe a little bit about myself, right? So I promise no sales talk. So my background is I started in a company called Groupon back in 2013, right? Then went to Maxis. And funny thing enough, in Maxis, after 2 years, my ex-bosses from Groupon actually left the company and bought back the Groupon business, right? So you'll see in the next slide over here, right? So if you're unfamiliar with what Fave is it started out as a company called KFit, right? So it was inspired by ClassPass in the US, right? And basically, it pivoted the business model and it acquired the Groupon business in Southeast Asia. So we acquired the business in Groupon Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. And that's when we really pivoted the business, right? And so Fave as a business still exists today, it still thrives, but for the purpose of tonight's conversation, we'll be focusing on FavePay, right? Why FavePay? Is because I think the Groupon business has been in existence for quite some time. But FavePay was really, at least in Malaysia back in 2017, one of the first mobile payments platform to launch. We were so early back then that when we approached merchants, we said, hey, would you like to accept mobile payments? They basically said, I don't think anyone in Malaysia will pay with their phone, right? People here barely use credit cards or debit cards. They'll just pay with cash. That was the sort of reactions I was getting, right? So for those of you unfamiliar with what FavePay is, if you take a look at this slide, you'll see that FavePay is essentially a mobile payments platform. It's as simple as whipping out your phone over here, scanning a QR code, and paying. Right. So if you've ever used GrabPay or DBS Pay, right, it's all pretty similar platforms, right? So today, I think many of us take for granted, whether you're in Singapore, whether you're in Malaysia, whether you're in Indonesia, that mobile payments is given, right? As I mentioned earlier, back then, it was a real struggle for us, right? So we launched in January 2017, and I remember that we had zero traction. To give you an example, what I mean by zero traction, and of course, right, I'm no longer with Fave, so I can share this freely. We had 200 employees in Malaysia, right? But on a daily basis, we only got 20 transactions, right? And each employee on a monthly basis received 200 ringgit credits to use Fave. So which means the company was giving them money, but they were not even using it, right? So that was the struggle we started with, right? Now, because FavePay was essentially an offline payments product, it was very difficult for us to gauge the success of this, right? So data was crucial in us growing this product. So let me start with the first one, right? Using data to guide our merchant acquisition strategy, right? What do I mean by that, right? So when you think of merchant acquisition, you take for granted today that every restaurant accepts credit cards, right? But really, it was a real struggle, right? Understanding what our customers wanted, understanding how to acquire the correct type of merchants at the beginning, right? Of course, I would like to say that, hey, you know what, let's go and acquire all the merchants, but that wasn't the case, right? So when we first started out, if you take a look at this slide, I'll be honest with you, it was a spray and pray strategy. We essentially went all around Malaysia, any merchant, any small cafe, any big restaurant, any bar, no matter how relevant, if they said yes, we were like, oh, thank God, right? We were so happy to have them. And that was really one of our first struggle, signing the wrong merchants. But it was a bit of a chicken and egg strategy. We did, right? Without the merchants, we couldn't get customers, and without customers, we couldn't get the merchants we wanted. So that was part of the struggle we had, right? But after a while, after 4 months, as my Shiyun mentioned over here, we sort of found we sort of used data to help us really guide our merchant acquisition strategy. So let me give you an example. If you look at these 4 pictures over here, the first picture you'll see is of a cafe, right? We started off with acquiring this sort of cafes, and it was good to a certain extent. It acquired our first few customers, right? We acquired the young millennials that love to go there, right? And then we slowly evolved to higher end restaurants like Absolute Thai over here. But now the real challenge in this second picture over here, Absolute Thai, is that customers were not willing to try a new mobile payments platform that they were unfamiliar with at a full service restaurant. It's because the price point was just too high, right? At least at the early stages. And we saw that a lot of the transactions happening on FavePay on a real-time basis were less than 10 ringgit, maybe even 20 ringgit and below. And that's when we found the jackpot that we needed to find a sweet spot. Anything between 5 to 15 ringgit, that was the best way for us to acquire a new customer, to basically get a customer willing to spend on FavePay. So the bottom picture below that is a famous frozen yogurt brand in Malaysia called Yao Yao, right? It was truly our breakthrough brand, right? Because it was located in all the right places and its price point was fantastic. It was anything between 5 ringgit to 15 ringgit, the perfect sweet spot, right? And that's where we really saw FavePay take a huge growth in terms of acquiring new customers. And so what happened after that was we replicated the same strategy by going after all similar type of dessert merchants. And it's interesting, for a good 6 to 7 months after that, when you thought of FavePay, you always thought of FavePay as, you know what, the dessert mobile payments platform, right? We were getting transactions at odd timings. You're getting transactions between 2 to 4 p.m. because that's after lunch, right? That's what the data were telling us, right? Then you're getting transactions anything between 8 to 10 p.m. Again, because that's when people have dinner. After have dinner, they're going to have their desserts. So using the data, we saw that, oh, you know what? Now that we have a regular set of customers, let's fill in the gaps, right? So that's when we went back to our full service restaurants to try and accommodate for lunches and to try and accommodate for dinner, right? And after that, we also discovered that, hey, you know what? We kind of have transactions between the period of 12 p.m. from lunchtime all the way to 10 p.m. But there's a gap between, from 12 midnight all the way till 12 p.m. No customers were making any transactions. And we were wondering, hey, what's wrong? And that's when we realized that, you know what, we just don't have the kind of merchants that open at that point of time. And it's only through real-time digital data where we really got to discover that pain point. So, and that's why I put a picture of Heineken, Tiger, and Guinness over here, right? So we actually acquired bars, and it was really interesting for us to see that transactions were taking place from 12 midnight all the way to 2 to 3 in the morning, right? And one of the reasons we noticed that was because banks, at least in Malaysia, right, they have a downtime, usually between 12 to 12:45, sometimes even 1 o'clock. And so when people want to pay, they usually have to pay in cash, right? Of course, this was back in 2017. Let me clarify that, right? So they use FavePay as a way to pay because, you know what, it solved a real pain point, right? So using digital data really helped us guide our merchant acquisition strategy. I cannot emphasize how important that was for us, right? And please feel free to ask me any questions after this, right? Now, interestingly, when you come to marketing, FavePay, fairly digital product, everyone assumed that we spent money on digital ads, but really we wanted to turn the town pink. And so if you look at these pictures here, it is the early point of sales materials that we used, right? We went to every night market, we went to every restaurant that would accept our sticker. We put it all there. But you know what? It was not enough, right? It really did not drive any transactions at all the merchants that we had acquired, right? It helped create awareness, but you know what? It's not something that was good enough, right? So we then used the famous promo codes, right? So for those of you who remember the early days of Grab and Uber, promo codes were everywhere, right? But we didn't use promo codes to, to acquire customers, so to speak. When we had the customers, we were using promo codes to drive specific customer behavior. And again, this was all with the help of data, right? So we had this dashboard that showed us real-time feedback. So if you take a look at this example over here, right? So we have two different images. Both start with Team FavePay weekends. So back then in Fave, the biggest challenge Fave had was that the traditional Groupon business model that had transaction, its peak time was from Monday to Friday. And Saturday to Sunday, what we found is that, hey, you know what? People generally don't shop online, at least not on Fave. Our assumption back then was that people were out, they were in the shopping malls, they were out hanging out with their friends. So they were not just spending money online, they were just spending money offline. But that's where FavePay complemented our business, because FavePay was an offline product, so to speak, right? You couldn't use FavePay if you were at home. You could only use FavePay if you were out shopping or if you are out at the restaurants, right? So if you look at the right-hand side of here, it's an aggressive promotion we used, but if you can see the T&Cs, it says valid for new FavePay customers only. So granted, Fave, when we acquired the Groupon business, had a lot of existing customers. We had very few FavePay customers. So we were trying to convert our existing customers, over 3 million of them in Malaysia, to start using FavePay. And so we did this as a customer acquisition strategy. It was definitely far more aggressive, but that's because we needed them to really try it out, right? And we did this over the weekend. So you couldn't use this any other day, not Monday to Friday. It was only Saturday to Sunday, right? Now, the other one you can see over here is 5 ringgit off times 5x. Now, our data showed us that we had a lot of first-time customers. So people saw the 15% cashback. They decided, you know what, let's go for it. Let's try it. And they never used it again. Because you know why? They just didn't think of it. Payments came naturally to them as using their wallet, using their cash, using their credit card. Paying with their phone just wasn't a habit. And so that's why we gave a promo code that was able to be used 5 times. And again, if you look at the promo code TNC, I don't know if you can see, it says that you can use between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, the whole purpose of that is we wanted to drive a repeat behavior among consumers within a short period of time, right? So our data showed us that if a consumer were to use FavePay at least maybe 3 to 5 times in a period of a week, right, they will be more likely to think of using FavePay or continue using FavePay for their next outings, for their next transactions, right? So obviously we went a bit more ambitious. We said Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 ringgit off 5 times. And you could use this at all FavePay outlets. So that was one of the ways we were using promo codes to drive consumer behavior, right? So most people think that of promo codes as just discounts. Really, for us, it was driving consumer behavior. I cannot emphasize how important that was to us. And we were receiving regular dashboards on this, right? Now, the third one, right, I think is performance management. So this is going to be a fairly short presentation. Now, when I say performance management, people think, hey, how are we tracking our performances? Interestingly enough, at least in Malaysia and even in Singapore, for those of you who remember the early FavePay days, what we did to really grow hack once we got all the merchants, right? In Singapore, we had the likes of Food Republic and so on, was we used these guys, right? We used these guys in pink t-shirts. We call them the promoters, right? So where online meets offline, right? So in the early days, no matter how many promo codes we gave, right, we found that consumers were always very hesitant to use mobile payments, at least for the first time. For those who are more, let's call them seniors, like me, like you, right? We were all, you know what? No problem, right? And that's why today, whenever a new mobile payments platform appears, especially in the likes of Malaysia, right, where we have over 40 e-wallet licenses issued, people are very comfortable. They try. In fact, they critique. They're telling the new players that, hey, you know what? This is what your platform should be like. But anyway, circling back to this was really important for us. We employed probably at any given point of time 30 to 40 promoters wearing our branding, wearing our t-shirts when they go to our specific stores, and they guide customers and they encourage customers to use FavePay. Now, how is this related to performance management? This was extremely important because in our digital dashboard, we needed to track the metric of, did these guys make a difference to our transactions? Let me, for example, if I had them there on a Sunday between 2 to 4 p.m. versus not having them there on a Sunday, are they going to make an impact to my sales? Or am I paying these guys $100, but they're just snaking around? They're not doing any work, right? Because there is no way I can possibly monitor 30 to 40 of these guys at any one time. So using the dashboard, I could immediately tell, hey, you know what? This guy at Gato at 2 to 4 p.m. is really doing a great job, right? He's contributing an extra 100 transactions versus the normal day. Or there could even be where the guy is working really hard, but there are no transactions. So in that particular situation, what happened? We contact the guy in real time. We contact him, hey, after an hour, say, hey, dude, you've been there for 1 hour. What's happening? Nothing's really happening. And he tells us that, you know what? This isn't the restaurant you want to put me in, right? And there can be many reasons, right? This restaurant is famous for dinner, or this restaurant is just about to close down, they don't have many customers. Or, interestingly enough, he says, you put me at a sit-down restaurant where customers come, sit down for 3 to 4 hours having a conversation, and they only pay their bill at the end of the day. But I've only got a 2 hour shift, but where this customer during my entire period has been here for 4 or 5 hours and he's not wanted to pay the bill yet. Right. So you learn a lot about the restaurant business when it comes to this. Right. And so you also learn about how best to strategize using the data that you have. Right. So these are just some examples, and I'm happy to share more with you. Right. Of course, I can't go into too much details because a lot of these things are private and confidential, but I'm happy to answer that. But just to add to this, the promoters really drove the FavePay transactions in the early days. Today, we don't really need to do that because it's now a habit, right? I'm no longer with FavePay, but I still use FavePay. I use all different e-wallets, and it just comes naturally to me 2 to 3 years later, right? So I think if there's something I want to sort of summarize, is it isn't just about having the data, it is about making sense of it. What do I mean by this? Having the data is fine, showing that, hey, I've got 300 merchants, they're all doing 300,000 transactions, but you need to make sense of it. You need to really understand what you're talking about, right? So the data can tell you many things. So in our case, in Fave, back then, right? Of course, I can't speak for them today, right? I'm no longer a company representative of them. I'm still good friends with the founders, but in Fave, we looked at a few things. We wanted to know, are we hitting our targets in terms of transactions and in terms of GMV, right? How many of our customers were repeat customers? How many customers were new customers, right? And most of all the merchants, how many of them were actually contributing to our overall performance, right? In the early days, it was really driven by just 1 or 2 merchants. So yes, we had a lofty, ambitious target, but you know what? 90% of the transactions and GMV, the gross merchandise value, came from one merchant, which didn't make sense because if at any point of time the merchant pulled out from us, or if the merchant decides that, you know what, I'm just gonna stop my business for whatever reason, as you all can see during the MCO that's possible, we were screwed, right? So then we realized that, hey, you know what, we might be hitting our targets, but we don't have a healthy business because we're over reliant on one customer. Now again, this isn't possible without data, without real-time digital data, right? Secondly, it is also about tracking performance management. So we had the way our data was skewed, that it was on an hourly basis, where we looked at our data every hour, and I could tell that on a Sunday at 4 p.m., this was roughly what we would do. And if we did something special, this is how we would do. And if I didn't do anything and the numbers were up, numbers may have been wrong, right? So it's all about making sense of it, right? And so I'm just going to end on one last slide because I think many of you have seen this, is in God we trust, all others bring data. So this is extremely, it's a quote that's stuck with me because back when we were doing FavePay, we were a very, very lean and small team. We had a merchant acquisition team that was extremely small. We had very little money, right? And we were charging, to say, not the cheapest in the market, right? So we had to use data to really scale sustainably and to also find growth hacks, right? So perhaps I'll just stop it over here, right? I know this is a fairly brief conversation, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. To the moderators.
Thanks very much for this very insightful talk. So we are just waiting for the questions to come in our YouTube chat. Typically, it takes a few minutes, given that typing is slower than just putting your hand up and asking. So bear with us for a moment. And there the questions are coming in. So let me... The first question is from Gaurav, and he says that he thinks that customer delight plays quite a role for customers to hold on to a platform. Is there a way that FavePay can do wallet top-ups for loyalty customers instead of customers claiming their rewards?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
No worries. So Gaurav has talked about customer delight and that it plays quite a role for customers to hold on to a platform. So in terms of loyalty of customers. And he's asking if there's a way for FavePay if FavePay can do wallet top-ups for loyalty of customers instead of customers claiming their rewards.
Okay, so interesting. So Let me clarify. So in Malaysia, and I think in Singapore, there's e-wallets and then there's mobile payments, right? So Fave has always intentionally been not an e-wallet platform, right? So because you don't store money on the Fave platform, you don't top up money there. You actually link it either to your bank account, to your debit card, or to your credit card, right? And so today you see Fave, they're very famous for their partner cashback, they call it. So what that means is if I go to Food Republic in Singapore and if I spend $10, hypothetically, let's assume they're giving me 10% cashback. That means I get $1 back, right? So that actually goes into your partner cashback wallet because that allows you, that builds a repeat behavior, right? So part of the value proposition of FavePay back then was really for you to be able to drive repeat customers to your merchant partners. So Fave always considered itself a two-sided marketplace. Yes, it did serve the customers, but it also served a large base of merchants, right? And merchants, a lot of merchants, and especially brands like Food Republic, Toastbox, and so on, they don't want to be necessarily associated with discounts because they have their certain brand value to adhere to, right? So when you spend with FavePay, generally speaking, most places the cashback is automatically rewarded into your partner wallet. Of course, there are some new features where you have to go and claim it, right? But I think that's still a small majority of it.
Great, thank you. Then the second question is from Jason, and it's about bringing data from different sources together. So he said he's wondering, how did you actually manage data across platforms during your campaigns? So thinking about data coming in from customer chats, Facebook, Google Ads, in-app mobile, website, and so on. How did you manage that, and how did you make sense of it?
Extremely painfully, right? So that's the one. But so all jokes aside, we had two things. We had an automated dashboard that told us most of the things we needed to know. So it's a partner called Holistics back then. So basically, that dashboard allowed us to see in real time which outlets had transactions, which outlets what's their GMV, how many new customers went there, and how many repeat customers went there. Those were the core information that we needed, right? And then at the end of the day, we then added all those things up, right, into a main dashboard, right, an offline dashboard, unfortunately, where we would then fill in all the other things, like, for example, our Google Analytics and so on, right? So it wasn't easy, right? But I guess the benefit of a company like Fave is that because it was so young, it didn't have any legacy platform issues, right? So I was previously with a bank. So when you work in a bank as large as the largest bank in Malaysia, in fact, you've got multiple different systems trying to speak to each other. And in that company, we truly struggled to get bring data together quickly enough for us to make business decisions.
Thank you. More questions coming in. I almost missed one, so thanks, guys, for calling that out. There was a question from Sinclair, and he says that FavePay obviously used data to drive decisions, but was there a scenario where decisions based on data did not quite work out?
Of course, that happens all the time. So now let me share with you. So we were always under the assumption that at the beginning we could just do it with we could just leverage on our platform and market to customers. And so we always, when we first started out, I mentioned that Fave was very famous from Monday to Friday. That was the bulk of our transactions, and on Saturday and Sunday, we just assumed that transactions weren't going to happen. And so for the most part, we focused a lot of our efforts, because that's what the data told us, on Monday to Friday. And that was when really our business never really took off, right? It was 4 months of doing the same thing over and over again. And before finally someone took the courage and stood up and said, hey, you know what? We're building an offline product. Screw it. Let's really try it on Saturday and Sunday, right? And this, I think, they're one of many examples, right? It also showed us that some of the data also showed us that, hey, you know what? Yao Yao, right? This brand that you've been, that's been your key brand. They've been driving sales. We need to grow them higher, right? But you know what? We had reached its peak at one point, right? There's always going to be a peak. And we grew really fast. And then one day we asked ourselves, hey, we've been growing 50% week on week. Why is it that this week we kind of like plateaued, right? So again, I think it's not, I wouldn't say the data didn't make sense. I think it's about, again, how you make sense of the data.
And one more question, of the data analysis that you have done, how much would you attribute to business intelligence versus data science?
So we didn't necessarily have a data science team back then in Faith. They do today, but we didn't. So we had a very strong business intelligence team. My ex-colleague now, he's in Gojek in Singapore, right? So it was very crucial for us. So it was not like there was a team analyzing for us, giving us customer behavior. So a lot of things had to be done ad hoc. So what we did was we just understood what our important metrics was, right? And then the rest I think really needed, you needed to massage the data and find out what you could from the data that you had. So I didn't have the good fortune to work with a data science team back then, but I had a really great business intelligence team.
Great. So we have two more questions before we close the Q&A for this session. The first one is, what's the model used by FAFPay for data security?
So my ex, so I'm not a technical expert, so I'm not going to pretend I can answer this thing. So my ex CTO used to say there is no such thing as you can't. He said there's no such thing as you can't be hacked, right? It is the perception of security. So what I'll say about Faith is that the good thing about Faith is we never truly collected any sensitive customer data. So for example, because we're not an e-wallet platform, we didn't need to collect your IC or your passport number, right? You would typically connect to us like through your emails, right, or your mobile number, and that's about it. All that we had, right? In terms of the credit card information, your banking information, all this was tokenized. All this was held by our third-party payment gateway, right? Who passed all of stringent compliance that was necessary. So, but again, I'm not a security expert, data security expert, so I'm not going to pretend I can answer that.
Fine, thank you. And the last question, how do you think we can create a differentiator in mobile payments since there are so many out there? So when you think about GrabPay, FAFPay, Apple Pay, Google Pay, how do you differentiate?
Okay, so perhaps I'll speak for it in a Malaysian context, because in Malaysian context, there are truly many different players. And I think I strongly believe it all around building multiple use cases. So let's take, for example, Touch and Go, if you are familiar with it. So Touch and Go started out as for a monopoly. So they were dominating the toll collection space, right? It was the only way for you to pay besides cash. And then they ventured into a partnership with Ant Financial, or Alibaba, basically, right? And they launched their own mobile wallet using the Ant Financial technology. But what makes it great is not the Ant Financial technology. It's the fact that you can pay your tolls with it. You can go and pay for your food with it. You can go and book your cinema tickets with it. You can pay for your parking with it. So for those of you who have been to Malaysia, for those of you who are familiar with how parking is traditionally paid for at the side of the road, it's a big hassle. So building multiple use cases within a mobile payments ecosystem helped solve that big problem. So in my previous role before Shopee, I was at the largest bank in Malaysia. And so over there, we started out with just a mobile banking app where you could just check your balances, right? The other thing is then you could now pay your credit card bills, pay your loans. But that wasn't enough. Those were traditional banking traditional banking features. Then we built on top of it different features. We made it easy for you to send money to your friends, right? You don't need to remember their bank account number anymore. I always have this joke where I say that if you can remember your bank account number, I'll send you 1 million ringgit. And almost no one can remember that, right? So we made it simple. We solved simple pain points for consumers. And when we finally introduced mobile payments on the same application for consumers, it was like adding the icing on top of the cake, really. So in short, I think building multiple use cases that solves different pain points for consumers into one platform will be what drives mobile payments and differentiates them from the rest, because payments by itself is just not enough.
There's one last question. I think we have time to take that one. How did FAFPay continue to... Sorry, that one we had. I've lost the question now. No, I think we've had it. No, sorry. I got confused. How did FAFPay continue to redesign their business model to address the growth challenge that was encountered? We didn't have this one, right?
So yeah, so we didn't necessarily answer this. And again,
yeah.
I'll say this up to my time when I was with Faith. And so Faith, the Faith Pay didn't start out as Faith Pay, right? So its initial name was something called Failsafe, and it was a massive failure. First of all, no one could pronounce it. FAVE was already tough for Malaysians to pronounce. Add the word safe. Failsafe was such a complicated name. So the business proposition was that merchants would give direct discounts to customers whenever customer will pay, or merchants could offer a freebie to customer in exchange for using mobile payments. And from a consumer mindset, you always got this inconsistent reward mechanism. So, for example, I could go to this restaurant, I pay with Failsafe, and I would get one free Chinese tea. I could go to another restaurant, I pay with Failsafe, and I get 20% off. It created a really big inconsistency, which made it difficult for our team to sell to merchants, and it made it very difficult for consumers to understand the value proposition for them, right? So we actually pivoted out of that business, probably a bit too late, but we eventually did, right? So it took us about 2 to 3 months to pivot out of that business. And when we did pivot, we pivoted into what is now known as the partner cashback model. The partner cashback model for Faith was instrumental in helping them acquire bigger brands, because bigger brands, as I mentioned, didn't want to be associated with discounts. What more asking them, hey, imagine going to KFC and say for every customer that buys a chicken, you give them a free Pepsi. It just didn't make sense for them, right? But when you said, hey, we're going to we're going to ask you to issue cashback to your customers, but it's locked into your brand. So it creates brand loyalty, because merchants loved it. And when you started to get the correct brand of merchants, like we did when we got Yao Yao and so on, customers then started coming back. And so I think that's one example of how Faith Pay really pivoted their business model and evolves accordingly. Had we stuck with the same model where go to this restaurant, get a free Chinese tea, go to this restaurant, get a free drumstick, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation here today.
Thank you so much for taking time to answer the questions of our audience. So now I would like to ask you to pick a winner and to quickly recap the questions. So there was the first one around customer delight, customer loyalty. The second one was about data-driven decisions and when it didn't quite work. The third one is managing data across platforms, bringing different sources together. Fourth one, how do you make sense of tracking users across platforms and channels? Fifth one, data analysis, whether you attributed that to business intelligence or whether you work with data science teams. And then the next one was sixth question, data security. And the seventh one was about redesigning the business model to continue supporting business growth. We have disqualified one question because that was asked by our team member, and obviously we don't want her to win a voucher. We know it was a good question.
So I love the last question, right? So I don't. Yeah.
So redesigning the business model to address growth challenge.
Yeah.
Well, then congratulations to our winner. I'm glad we took your question as well. Our team will be in touch to make sure that you get your voucher.
Yeah.
Great, then thanks very much for your time, for sharing all your insights and that really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to the second part of the evening. Before we do so, quick thank you also to the team that's making DOS possible. It's a group of volunteers. We all have our day jobs and we do this as a side activity. Normally we would be having beers and pizza and getting together somewhere in a CBD in Singapore. But we believe this is a good alternative to keep knowledge sharing and keep the community going. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy the sessions and the topics. Also, big thanks to our sponsors who make these sessions possible. So that's Decision Science, Happy Marketer, and eClerks. And now I will briefly introduce the next speaker. So that's Vincent Han, Solutions Engineer at Salesforce, joining us. And he will talk about the 7 deadly sins of marketing analytics and how to fix them. I don't think that title needs much more explanation. I'm really looking forward to what Vincent has to share. So Vincent, the floor is yours. Vincent, you're on mute and somehow I cannot unmute you.
Thanks for calling us out. It always happens to me. All right. So let me. Now I believe everybody can both see my screen and hopefully can also hear me as well. Okay. So what I'm looking to talk about then today is, for the second time, very much around what are the 7 deadly sins of marketing analytics and how we can fix them together. Because over the last few years, one of the things I've very much seen is that regardless whether I'm working within market research, digital analytics, doing some behavior tracking for different video games at Square Enix, or talking about data and audience strategy at Salesforce, and most recently moving more into the concept of like solution advisory for data management and data marketing intelligence, there's one particular theme I've always realized, which is sometimes people ask the wrong analytics questions. It might be something as simple as, can you just get me a bunch of numbers towards what metrics can your dashboard show towards, I basically just need this report on a campaign which we have been running a few months ago. And surely that's causing a bit of pain on my analyst side, but I believe that there are not just sins which are frustrating potentially fellow analysts here, but ultimately they are causing a lot of business challenges. So what I want to spend some time on today is to talk through what these different analytics sins are I've seen through these different parts of the analytics community. What are some of my thoughts as to what we could do about fixing them? But as I'm doing that, it's very much an open discussion. So I'm very keen to also hear from the broader community. What else have you seen that is to be considered a sin of marketing analytics, data intelligence gone wrong? So without further ado, let's talk about marketing intelligence. So what we're seeing here is a type of report some of us may have seen, some of us may have even created it. An example here of just a particular campaign performance review for our Facebook winter campaign, looking at some measures of impressions, spend, click-through rate, giving us a breakdown of like different placements and creative, looking again at spend and impressions, and also having a comment on like some of the details. Now, what I want to ask is, looking at this type of report, what's wrong with this report? Please feel free to comment down below in the chat. I'm very keen to hear what are your thoughts. What's wrong with this report? Comment down below. Anything you believe that's not working well? So if we think about it, what are your thoughts on the fact that this report is looking at a campaign which we have been running from March 2020 to April 2020, but it's actually been produced in June? What's wrong with that?
There's a few comments coming in from the audience. So one is no comparison values. The other one is click-through percentage is too low. No audience, no targeting, no insights, just shows numbers, observations, no primary KPIs and benchmarks, no benchmarks. I think the audience is onto something.
Yep, you absolutely are. Keep it going. Let's do it together. Let's join forces and dissect this piece of data. I was just about to put in a swear word to stop myself.
There's also a comment that the data is not actionable. Also not in real time.
Absolutely. So what themes I can really see here, and we are absolutely onto something. What's the so what? So if I know what's the number of impressions, what am I getting from it? What's the benchmark? What's the story I'm trying to tell? Absolutely. Not real time. All right. Great ideas. And a lot of the ideas you have mentioned are exactly what we should talk about when we talk about deadly analytics. And first of all, let's start with the obvious one. It's an analysis silo. I'm just looking at this one campaign here, but that doesn't give me really the big picture. I mean, seriously, I'm not just running one campaign, I'm probably running dozens of campaigns. What's the value in me just looking at this one campaign in isolation? By the way, especially this campaign is running in March and April 2020, so probably there's a little virus affecting our overall campaign performance, so I'm not necessarily getting that bigger picture. Speaking about bigger picture, it's just those golden numbers. It's essentially just saying, oh yeah, just get me the number of clicks, the volume of spend I've had. But what does it really tell me about what's the impact this campaign has had? Can I truly say that knowing that the click-through rate has been 0.01%, this is the bottom line impact it had? Can I roll this back up to the CMO and can say, look, this campaign has this X impact on your marketing ROI? Probably not. And in the same way, besides being a vanity KPI, there's no context on this data. I'm just seeing the click rate. I'm just seeing the clicks, but I don't know if 2,500 clicks, are they good? Are they bad? Spending $300,000, did I go over budget? Did I go under budget? How do I know? Because there's no context in this data. One more aspect to highlight. It's post-mortem, right? This campaign has been running in March and April 2020. If we are producing this report in June, besides being a nice little point to archive one in our shared drive, what action am I going to take on this? This campaign has long since been finishing. And unless I'm recycling the same campaign over and over again, there's virtually no action I can take on it because the campaign is long since over and we have moved on, especially in this time. End of March, lockdown was about to happen. Now we are already in phase 2 of exiting circuit break. Time moves fast. In the same way, it's read-only insights. These slides are not for external distribution. I understand that sometimes you want to have a PowerPoint just, to send it over via email. That's perfectly fine. But if this becomes the only source of gaining data intelligence, there's a challenge of not empowering people to become data literate themselves. Going into the dashboard or any interactive report, even if it's an Excel, slicing and dicing the data themselves. That's not cool. Because what we want to get to, especially as analysts, is to become partners in crime with our commercial teams, to look at the data together and see what's the story it tells us, what type of optimization we need to do. Read-only insights don't allow us to do this. That also has a problem when we talk about this kind of data Sherlockism, like trying to find the needle in the haystack. Yeah, sure, we're getting now this breakdown by placement, by creative, but there's one challenge with it. This works if we just had a few placements and a few creatives to find what's the sweet spot. But most of our businesses, we have maybe multiple brands, we have multiple channels, lots of campaigns in parallel. So if I get all these kind of super detailed breakdowns, it's hard for me to identify what's really driving an incremental change in performance. Is it the fact that I've targeted a certain audience, that I've used a certain creative format? I don't know, because I'm not getting this automatic data intelligence or forensic specimen. And the final thing, that's probably, if you look closely, do you notice that here we have got this data say placement 1 had 20 million impressions with a spend of 200,000? Now let's look at this here. We realize, okay, spend matches, but what about the number of impressions? Here we are having 5 million ad impressions. And here we're saying the same placement had 20 million. So what's correct? Is it 5 million? Is it 20 million? Well, welcome to the world of constant data QA checking. Rather than trusting the data, rather than taking action on it, we suddenly end up spending a huge amount of time to try and check, okay, where did this number go wrong? What is correct, what isn't? Analysis paralysis, not cool. So we want to have some way to change those analytics sins. Now, I'm very keen to hear later in the Q&A section, what are some of the other marketing analytics sins you can think of? Because I'm sure that's probably not just 7, that's probably 12 or 20. There's way more than that in here, right? But so in summary, what we're talking about are 7 different sins of 7 deadly sins of marketing analytics. So vanity KPI, the golden numbers, so very much those numbers about context. It's about just having a huge pivot table where we can slice and dice this data about 20,000 dimensions without getting the insight that matters. And sometimes the data is just available for one campaign or one marketing channel at a time. The data is mismatching, causing us to have a lot of problems when it comes to understanding whatever data is trustworthy or not. And worse to it, the data comes in like 1 or 2 months later, by the time we have probably moved on, and it's just a PowerPoint or maybe some Excel sheet, as opposed to something interactive our commercial teams can play with. So what do we want to do about this? Well, first of all, we want to get a bit of empathy, because some of those things, they might sometimes sound a bit academic in nature, if you will. But what we can talk about is, well, first and foremost, those are statements I've heard time and again, be it client side, be it vendor side. People are asking, yeah, well, I'm seeing some KPIs. I'm seeing that my click-through rate has increased. So what? What does it tell me? I don't really know whether my numbers are good or bad because I don't have context. I'm spending a huge amount of time on checking on those numbers, and I have to analyze each campaign one by one. And then there's just so much data to sift through, so that I basically find it a daunting task. Rather than coming into the office on Monday morning and say, let's see how it performed, I suddenly have this half-day-long exercise of just trying to understand what's going on. And because I don't really have it interactive, it makes it even worse. And then I just come to the sad realization that once I've analyzed all this data, well, turns out that the campaign is already finished, and the next campaign is already up in my campaign and marketing communications plan. So needless to say that those challenges, which are frustrating analyst users, they are causing frustrations for the marketing folks as well. We are in this together. So let's take a look into what we can do to change those things. Well, to start there, we look at vanity KPIs. If we chunk them into the magical arrow of turning our insights around, we might be able to spit out actual business ROI KPIs. Golden numbers, well, if we're adding some context, suddenly we are having some better understanding on whether 500,000 impressions are good or bad with the benchmark. We have a time comparison. If we are establishing some more automated way of QAing our data, some rules-based stuff, some proper consistency on a campaign naming convention, we can more trust our data. We want to make sure that we actually are able to get this data across channels. So wherever we are able to have a common link between data, people placing a campaign, on the price and the creative, we want to make sure that we are looking not just campaign by campaign, but across channels, and then obviously giving us the option to slice and dice it further on. We want to talk about data forensics. So we want to not just have some vanity project given to our data scientist teams. We want them to become part of our task force. We want to say, okay, let's look into some of the key drivers of conversion rate, for example. Let's bring those outputs and put them directly on the dashboard. Let's elevate the profile of a data scientist to become really a data forensics person, as opposed to sometimes having not necessarily the best projects available. And we want to make those reports available always on, wherever, again, the source data allows it, of course. Because there's no use in having data 1 month afterwards. And if we can represent them in some form of interactive dashboard, report, whatever that might be, the better. So how does then better marketing intelligence look like? So I'm just going to show you one example of what I've seen might be that future vision of a marketing performance dashboard. And again, everybody has obviously a different idea on what good looks like. But this is just my personal view as to what I believe might be a way to get marketing performance data shown. The first element is that this particular dashboard here is very much designed to look across data sources. So that could be Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, could be some paid media sources such as AppNexus. It could also be Adobe or GA data. It might be some media planning data, etc. And it's all about bringing these data points in and doing so ideally automatically, having it linked together. Because typically, what we really want to be able to answer is not so much a question, what has been the click rate on that individual campaign, but instead, so across channels, how much we have been spending, what's been the total sales it has therefore been generating. And as we're doing that, we also want to cross-relate to the different goals we have got. So maybe you have got a certain budget across channels defined. This is how much marketing is allowed to spend in this time period. So now we understand that, well, we have spent 80% of our budget and we have delivered 92% of our sales goal. So we're actually doing well. And the only way to find this out is, again, getting data context. It's equally important to be able to continuously monitor performance over time, having that daily update on, okay, how am I trending? But also being able to, again, slice and dice the data by. So rather than just having that top level view, maybe starting to break down performance of sales or engagements of web traffic by the individual channels, allowing people to see what are the different parts that ultimately make up the broader sum of it. In the same way, seeing multiple measures of performance shown side by side to see how they relate. What's the correlation? Do I see an increase in spend? Well, then I should see an increase in sales. And again, by having the data brought to us in a granular manner, being able to still see on a creative level even what's performing well and what isn't. Leveraging outputs from data scientist teams to potentially surface some insight that matter. For example, seeing that this particular email subject works really well for this particular audience, giving us a higher conversion rate. And finally, being able to tie this marketing performance data together with our sales and product e-commerce data. Now, to be fully clear, this is just one example of how a marketing intelligence dashboard might look like as a future vision. The exact visualizations, the platforms we use for those dashboards, they might change. But the idea in the end of the day is we want data to be unified, we want insights that matter, and we want this to be available in an interactive manner, always on for different stakeholders, rather than this kind of super granular individual data point. So now that we understand this kind of end game of where we want to get to, what are some of the different steps we could take? So to start with, let's talk about how we are getting from those vanity KPIs here to something which is more alluding to business ROI KPIs. And I think what is really valuable to start thinking about here is what makes a good KPI. And it is not, again, the click-through rate. It's not, full stop. What it is, or it can be, is, first of all, it needs to be a KPI that is reliably tracked. Meaning, it's not just something which we maybe once in a month get, but it's ideally something that we constantly have access to. If it's driving some financial impact, like revenue, number of orders, sales volume, well, that's even better, because that's probably stuff which shows up in the P&L as well. If it's also tied to user actions, that's alternatively really great as well. So something like conversions. Somebody has shown a degree of intent. They have moved down the funnel. That is something we can definitely describe as a KPI, something as we care about. And really important, actually, it needs to be universally understood across teams. And there are a lot of KPIs. Just think about engagement rate. The social team, they look at engagement rate totally in a different way than the paid media team. And probably the app analytics team, they measure engagement in a different way as well. So if everybody has their own way of describing what that KPI refers to, it becomes challenging. So you want to have something which is easily understandable and ultimately something which can also be used to really determine the business health. Moving on to golden numbers, again, it's a similar idea. What do we need to get in place to have better context in our data? And here's just a bunch of ideas to think about. Well, we could start with something simple. Historic campaign performance. How have campaigns been performing over time? So rather than just looking at the snapshot, here's the performance of campaign XYZ in March. Let's see how it's been trending over time, year-on-year comparison, etc. Let's also compare it against the budget or performance goals. If I'm supposed to spend 100,000 and now I'm spending 150,000, not good. How does it relate to my revenue or my conversion goal? We can also slice and dice it by the different campaign parameters, maybe the ad audience, the creative, the site inventory, whatever, to add that additional context and to slice and dice our performance by. Establishing some performance benchmarks based on other campaigns or other marketing channels we have seen so that we understand whether a click-through rate of 1% is good or bad. And comparing different time ranges against each other. Again, it could be the COVID-19 period, but it could also be something less harmful than like compare the week before Chinese New Year versus the week after Chinese New Year. See how it differs, because that ultimately gives us the context we need to make more informed decisions. Data mistrust. It's another perspective we need to think about. How can we avoid having to constantly cross-check numbers? Actually, it starts with robust naming convention. I've seen a lot of times that when we are not able to really reliably see where the data is coming through, it's often due to the fact that campaign names are not correctly defined, conversion tracking isn't properly set up, etc., etc. So we want to fix our tracking, and we want to fix also the naming of campaigns and media buys, etc., so that the data which is coming through is standardized and reliable. What also helps us to have some additional classification lookup files. So for example, if in our campaign name we have something like product ID, well, the product ID wouldn't really tell us much, but then if we just upload like a flat file or connect it like in a VLOOKUP to say product ID 123 as product name, whatever, product category, something else, we get this additional context. It also helps to have some form of data comparison reports. And what I mean by this is, if, let's say, we take some export from Facebook ads data, well, Facebook keeps on changing some of their numbers, especially if you think about the attribution time windows. So if I'm putting a campaign report March 1st to March 31st on March 31st, and I have a 7-day look-back window for my campaign, well, naturally, that means that I don't account for all conversions. So what I need to make sure is when I compare in my BI tool the performance against the source data, I'm looking at exactly the same data so that I'm having a like-for-like comparison. It might also help to have some form of data consistency alerts. Simple example could be there are more conversions than ad impressions. Unless I'm told otherwise, that typically doesn't make sense. And also for everybody involved, it helps to process or to document what's the flow in which we are pulling the data together. Because sometimes maybe something breaks in our code or an API connector is broken or whatever. We want to be aware on what are the individual steps it takes from the campaign happening to the campaign being reported on. Analysis silos, I'm going to keep it brief. It's about exporting the data across different accounts. It's about standardizing the data from different accounts. It's linking the data together across these data sources. And it's also important to start thinking about how we're going to be able to link our delivery data back together with our media plan data. And in the same way, thinking about marketing data on one side and then non-marketing data on the other side. So again, that example of, I want to see how my marketing campaigns have been driving e-commerce sales or even brick and mortar sales. It's not something I can link directly one-to-one, but on an overall basis, I surely can. So that I'm ultimately seeing the bigger picture of how is marketing driving bottom line impact. And as I'm doing this, I also want to help empower the broader data scientist and business intelligence community. So thinking about a few things where instantly we can join forces. First, let's talk about data cleanup. Let's talk about what are some of the programmatic ways, so to speak, code-driven ways to just clean up the data, because data is oftentimes messy. Because when you talk to essentially somebody who really understands data, typically there's a lot of time invested in just getting the data in shape before we deploy and train our model upon. So naturally, those techniques to clean up the data, be it in Python, be it in R or SQL, can be deployed here right as well. We might want to do an analysis on those kind of performance drivers, something we see here on the right-hand side. What are those combinations of different parts of our campaign setup that drive an increase in conversion rate? We can do some form of correlation analysis between, say, online and offline, because typically those data points don't directly speak to each other. Forecasting, and obviously our all-beloved topic of attribution. By joining forces here, we ultimately move beyond just reporting what happened towards what could happen. The reason why we don't want to just report on what happened is because we want to really also avoid this idea of post-mortem. We want to make sure that we get marketing data exported automatically. We want to make sure that the way we process that data is somewhat standardized, looking at ongoing performance data, and also in the same way just schedule some form of campaign exports. And finally, something which is oftentimes overlooked is, even if we have the greatest dashboard on earth, people may not always open it. People have other things in their plate. But if we set up automatic alerts and say, hey, look, dear marketer, I've seen that the conversion rate for your Facebook campaign has been dropping by, say, 20% week on week. Please look at this. They for sure will look at it. But they may not get that insight if they're being told, oh, can you please make sure to open the dashboard every day? Leading me to the final point on read-only insight. All of those great things we have established, they live and die with how easy we make it for our peers to make use of those insights. If it's just a read-only data export, I'm still not gonna get the full value. So what I need to make sure is that I've got some way to make insights / dashboards accessible across teams, to encourage data discovery. So giving these the options of just slicing and dicing the data, breaking it down by campaign, breaking it down by media, by audience, whatever it might be, to drive that curiosity to see what is driving an incremental performance. Therefore, to drive the next optimization action. I've talked about the email alerts, but also then give the people the option to just export the data into Excel, etc. Because the dashboard obviously has been created, it's super visual, it's nice, but sometimes people just want to do their quick pivot table. So let's give them that option. And finally, give them people the option to share those dashboards interactively. Drop a link to the dashboard in an email. Done. This is the best way to drive analytics adoption, and therefore data literacy, a culture of data curiosity within the organization. So in summary, after this, what are the 7 things I would hope you can take from today's session away with you? Let's together abide by measuring actual marketing ROI. Let's talk about adding context around the data, having those benchmarks in place. Let's talk about having some degree of more automatic data QA to avoid all these nifty and annoying data checking and data QA questions. Let's make sure that as we are looking at marketing data, that this is done across channels. Let's make sure that we are leveraging our data science resources to surface some additional data insights and ensure that those reports are always on, not 1 month later, but as close as to real time as we can get. And that those reports are made available in an interactive manner. With that, I would like to say, first of all, thank you for listening in. I'm really keen to hear if there are any questions or comments, and if you have also spotted some other marketing analytics sense.
Thanks, Vincent, for the very insightful presentation. Myself, I was listening and I actually nodded a few times when you shared your presentation. So we actually have a few questions from the audience. Actually, the first question is from myself. I'm keen to actually understand, and if you can elaborate a little bit more. I think being marketer myself, whenever we run campaigns, there are always so many variables in a marketing campaign, and we're talking just one marketing campaign. There might be like several campaigns running at one time that's always on, that's tactical. How do we know which data points are really the one that actually drives sales? If you can just share a bit more on this.
Absolutely. So typically the challenge is that there are lots of moving pieces in a campaign, right? So you have got the audience we are targeting, the place where the campaign is running, how much we're spending, what's the pacing, so $5 CPM versus $3 CPM. We have got the campaign strategy, the targeting, etc. There's so many moving pieces. So what we want to do is, first things first, reflect those different ingredients of what ultimately makes up our campaign in the campaigning, or in some other way, make it available as a dimension to slice and dice my marketing data by. So what I mean by that is, rather than analyzing campaign by campaign, I want to say, I don't really care about the individual campaign. Heck, I don't even care about the channel. I just want to now go and say, get me a breakdown of conversion rates by audience so that I can directly see, irrespective of what campaign this was on, which audience I've had the highest conversion rate for. So let's say I've now identified that this is millennials. Cool. So now let me understand for the millennials what type of campaign has been performing really well. And this way I start to be able to see what are the different permutations, if you will, that drive performance. And spoiler alert, that is, by the way, something which we can do manually really well. But data scientist resources, they will love to do that analysis because they can surface those insights automatically using predictive algorithms.
Thanks, Vincent, for the question, for the answer. I have another question from Hao Tian. So he asked, he or she asked, how do you balance between obtaining actionable insights and preventing yourself from misinterpreting the data?
That's a good one. I believe there's typically two things we want to consider, right? One is this idea of unconscious bias, which is obviously used in a different context usually, but it applies to data as well. We might have an assumption that because this campaign has had so many video views, it must have been good. Only to then realize that yes, it had a lot of video views, while 50% of the people were pressing dislike on the campaign video or having a super negative sentiment. So the best way to go about this is, one, to consistently check what are the assumptions you're making, what's the hypothesis you're going into when you're doing your analysis, and to check, is that analysis founded, or like that hypothesis you're making, is that wishful thinking, or is that truly like in a scientific manner neutral to really just try to understand what's going on? And secondly, it's oftentimes really valuable to, again, partner between the commercial teams and the analytics teams. So rather than just the analytics team sitting in their own reporting and then just saying, okay, here marketing stakeholder, these are the insights, for them to regularly come together to jointly look at what does that tell us. The marketer obviously having the broader context on what this campaign or this set of activities was about, and the analyst being able to act as the trusted advisor to verify, well, does that make sense or does that not make sense? That typically really helps to have that collaboration between marketers and analysts to challenge that danger of misinterpreting the data.
Thanks, Vincent, for that tips. Sinclair, there was a question in terms of being recorded or not. Yes, the session is recorded, so we will upload this on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested to watch, you can actually rewatch this session. We have another question from Dennis. What are some caveats of multi-touch attribution? I think all of us know that data-driven attribution is one of the hottest topic now. Are these cases where it's not appropriate? Are there any cases where it's not appropriate, and when should it be used? How does it work?
So when we talk about attribution, right, there are a few things we want to consider. And the first one is, can we identify the type of conversion or the type of user interaction on a user-by-user level? So that typically works really well when we talk about online conversions. But as soon as we start talking about offline conversions, so somebody going to a store, the concept of multi-touch attribution in the sense of directly reattributing conversions and revenue to individual channels falls apart, because it's very hard to tie somebody making a purchase in store back together to the online campaigns they have seen. The other thing also is about data completeness. So by default, walled gardens, we won't get any user level at impression data. So by default, we would already just be looking at different clicks, meaning that we already have to have put in some caveats as to how robust or how exhaustive attribution will be. But realistically, when I sometimes hear customers ask us, so what's your point of view on attribution? Can you do it? Oftentimes the actual question is, are we having a way, like, are we able to analyze how each individual marketing channel has been driving overall conversions, as opposed to can we do this multi-touch attribution step by step. So I think that the best way to think about it is that it is a discussion worth having, but it is never a discussion which will be perfectly solved, simply because of the issue of data completeness and many customer interactions simply not being trackable on a user-by-user level, hence not being available as inputs to whatever attribution model we are using.
Thanks, Vincent. So we have another question from Gaurav. Don't worry, I'm not going to miss your question. His question is, how do we ensure that only high quality and comprehensive data is maintained? Usually there's only one channel or the other is missed out for data collection due to disintegration of the data platforms.
So there is typically a challenge on the fact that some of the marketing data, be it on a technical level or user by user level or on an aggregate reporting level, is not there. That is valid. But then the question is, do we want perfection to be the enemy of progress? So there might be those people who are saying, okay, so I'm getting all my digital data, but I have whatever, 30% of my spend offline, so I shouldn't be looking at it. But a counter argument would be, how are you ever going to be able to verify what digital is doing on its own to drive success? What it means is that whilst we are never going to be able to have everything in one place, everything tied to a user level, as far as we can get to it, the better. And typically the first place to start is to at the very least start linking our paid media data together across different channels where we have got the data available on an aggregate level. And then the next step would typically be to start linking into our web analytics data. At least start on that journey.
Okay, cool. We have two more questions. I think we're going to stop after this two questions. So the second last question is from Azwari. The question is, what strategy would you use for circumstances when vanity KPIs cannot be linked to KPIs organization care? For example, when we do not have information on the revenue generated from the campaign.
So obviously, first ideal case would be try to get that tracking set up, but obviously that's the long-term solution. The short-term solution would be to very much do a correlation analysis, right? So if we can say, okay, I can't understand campaign by campaign what the revenue was, but maybe I can just see it on an overall level. I'm still able to see, okay, I've had an increase in impressions over time. How does that increase in impressions relate back to the increase in revenue I've got? So a typical example would be, I want to see how marketing is driving an impact on my brand recall, my brand equity numbers. Obviously, there's no direct link between those two. But maybe what we are able to approximate is to say, well, in that branding study, we are able to measure, let's say, by socioeconomic group, so age group, whatever. And maybe that age group information I've also got in my campaign setup. And whilst it is never going to be an exact science, so maybe at least I can say, as I see an increase in my media spend against a certain age group, can I see a similar increase in brand recall over time for that given age group or not? What's the degree of correlation I've got? So simply what trying to cross-relate to overlap those data points, wherever there's a commonality, be it date, be it age group, channel, region, that will typically be helpful to at least get started in that analysis of bringing typically not linked data together.
Thanks, Vincent. So we have the last question of the session. Are you able to assess the stickiness or the depth of client engagement levels through the data obtained on your campaign data? What variables do you normally look at to assess this?
So if I read the question correctly, if it's about understanding what's the level of user engagement we have got coming from our individual campaigns, it's absolutely right that we would not just want to look at conversion metrics, right? But what we want to start thinking about, what are those individual user actions from start to finish a user typically would take which we can reattribute back to the campaign. So if you think from a web analytics perspective, we very much have a typical user flow. I visit the site, maybe I read some branded content, and if it's an e-commerce company, well, then maybe I go to the product category section, browse for product, add it to the cart, go to the checkout process, make a purchase. So if I'm able to identify those individual user actions, and I'm able then to also link back the user who came from that given campaign to my website, for example, I can still try to understand users coming from campaign XYZ, what's their level of engagement across the different stages of the user journey as compared to another group of users.
Okay.
To confirm, does that answer the question?
If Svev, you can give us a thumbs up or thumbs down, whether that has answered your question, I think that would be helpful. So maybe just to summarize the type of question, the 5 questions that we received today. So the first question from Hao Tian is, how do we actually balance between obtaining insights and misinterpreting the data? Dennis asked the question about multi-touch attribution. Gaurav asked about ensuring data quality. The question is, the 4th question was strategy when vanity KPI cannot be linked to the organization's KPI. And the last question is, how do we assess the stickiness or the depth of the client engagement through KPI, through data? So would you want to pick the best question of the session?
Oh, the choice is on me. No pressure. I would probably say, I believe actually the question about obtaining insights and misinterpreting data is a really valuable one. It's something we should think about more, how we avoid jumping to a potentially wrongful conclusion.
Yep, so that it would be Hao Tian. So congratulations for winning the $50 voucher. So we will be reaching out to you, or maybe I think after the session, in terms of how you can actually redeem this voucher. So thank you very much, Vincent, for sharing with us this very insightful, 7 deadly sins on the common mistakes that most marketers do. So we have next session. We have a presentation, a demo by Mero. So we have Pavel here, who is the co-founder of Mero, who will be doing a short demo on the CDP platform that Mero has developed. So Pavel, the floor is yours if you want to go ahead and share.
Working on that. Perfect. There we go. You guys can all hear me, see me, and have the
Yes,
screen.
we can hear you, and we can see you as well.
So, last session of the day has been exciting, wide, broad, and inspiring, actually, so far, the 2 presentations we've seen so far. So, from me, no slides, so happy days. But if there's one thing that I would like to you to take away from the session, guys, is that when it comes to your customers, how intimately you know them is the single biggest driver of your P&L account of your business. And to that, of course, you need data. And a lot of the conversation I've been part of over the last couple of years at Digital Analytics Wednesday has always been about data, and it's really kind of spiraling to it even more so. So my name is Pavel. I'm a CMO co-founder of Mero. We are a Singapore founded and based company. Right now I'm dialing from Brno in Czech Republic. I stay in Prague most of the time here during the Corona time, but if you don't know what Brno is, I don't blame you. Think of it as a Johor Bahru to Singapore, something like that. Cool city, but kind of, smallish. So what I will take you through today is our demo of our product, our CDP. I do assume that in this space with kind of this level of expertise and concentrated interest here, everybody is really aware of what that stands for right now. So we are talking about customer data platform. It's obviously part of the marketing technology as well as sometimes being categorized as the ad tech as well. So definitely in that space. I will take you through a demo, an example. So what I prepared is what my team is working on right now, which is a demo for kind of a data we prepared for a banking scenario. So you'll be able to imagine what does that look like from a user's perspective to be experiencing that. There's a couple of things that I relate to that Vincent mentioned here before, and that's one thing was on online and offline. He says that the data doesn't often connect, and that's absolutely true for a lot of businesses. This is often where we start. My team's background comes from data engineering, so we understand that what the kind of the work and the struggle that's behind these pretty shiny dashboards, and that's really the hard part. I think this comes down to one thing. Marketers typically, if you look at our background, and I would definitely count myself amongst the marketer, we really don't have a technical background. Yet we are suddenly exposed to a lot of tools, a lot of technology, a lot of data, and we don't really have a clue about data management. So this has been typically IT domain, and that's where kind of you start seeing a little bit of the cracks in the floor, in my opinion, and that's kind of the experience we have with clients. So we build the platform in several layers. In one way, we are trying to decouple the users in the business, because we understand that at a large company, the collaboration is absolutely inevitable, is essential. Yet the organizations internally are siloed, as is their data typically. So we built first a layer for data integration. So a platform which would, where if you are not a data engineer, data analyst, you wouldn't really know what to do there. But we built a separate platform for as a different interface for business user with completely different set of expectations, different sort of skill set required to be able to use it. Before we started Miro, just maybe to give you some context, we have worked on many data integration and visualization projects. So my team has worked with a lot of the kind of advanced analytics. We've talked about attribution. I kind of have to chuckle a little bit, because that's been a topic we've been kind of going back and forth with clients for last nearly a decade in Europe, and certainly last 5-7 years in Southeast Asia as well. And so we're going to have that background, that experience. So we understand that there's a bit of an expectation that's not being really met in the market, which is from the business intelligence to these dashboards. They are often not super user friendly, and they are definitely not a business user friendly. Is actually what I meant to say. Is we see that there is a level of technicality where you still need to understand the data. So we really try to kind of look at that angle specifically, and we try to make it as simple as possible. So just to show you kind of the complexity behind the platform, right now I'm in an environment where we are looking at the data integration piece. So you see very easily oriented, easy to navigate kind of workflow of data. So you see a component that's getting probably data from MailChimp. So I would kind of see all I'm getting from that, right? So you really see that this is a relatively easy to orient, but also why I'm saying this is not a business user interface is, for example, you see there's a SQL query that this is feeding into, and it looks like this. So as a business user, I totally couldn't make any sense of this, and this is really not my environment. I have got nothing to do here, so I can be completely shaded away from this. But the reason why I'm sharing it is because personally, and this is really just my preference as a user of these things, is if I am presented with a black box where I don't see what's happening in the background, I tend to trust it. And again, I'm going back to Vincent's argument on mistrust of the data. And the lack of transparency is certainly one of the things that we see, and we try to avoid by design in the product. So the ability to really mitigate all of the errors or the duplications to do the data preparation in the platform. That's one of the key things we absolutely focus on, and we therefore have an environment that's nice and organized for user. Of course, security features, automation, history logging, versioning, like all of everything you would expect in an analytics bench for an analyst or a data engineer. Languages like SQL, Python for the data wrangling. So just a tiny bit on this part, because I think the more interesting things are then in the what do you do with the data, how do you present it, and what are you learning. So I'm gonna jump into different interface. This is called Business Explorer, as the name I think is quite suggestive. So I'm going to show you a few things in here. So we are in an environment which we use as a demo instance, and we are effectively working on the back of artificial data set, where you see that we have a couple different data sources coming in. So we've got bank environment. So if you think of your DBS, your Citibank, it's going to be very similar. So we would have a bank's website, definitely a marketing channel. We would have a peer-to-peer app, some of the newer, cooler Revoluts of this world within the bank portfolio. I think every bank has something like that, especially in our key market in Indonesia right now. We have the mobile banking app itself. We've got marketing automation tool, and we've got couple internal tools. We also have a few destinations here connected. So you see that we are integrating with Facebook and Google Ads. So clearly, advertising use case here to be shown. When you understand what goes into it, of course, I'm completely steering you away from that entire technical data preparation, all of the transformations of the data. So you really get to kind of present it a really nice and simple to understand environment. What's next after understanding what's inside is definitely attributes. So variables or attributes is basically how we are describing customer. That's very important. In typical projects, I think there's about 20, 30 here, really simple. We would typically have about a couple hundred, depends on how kind of broad the client's business is. If I show you the attributes available on the website, there are things you would typically know from web analytics space, where you would be looking at, referrers, UTMs, which kind of you can slice the data by. The difference here is that we are describing individual customers and that visitors buy this, and we're doing kind of a lot of things in the background to it. So, but there are things you will understand. It's like you will know what a UTM from a campaign is. So, as an example, could be something called small banner campaign mortgage, something like that. And all of these things are then kind of assembled on a customer profile, and eventually you can use them for super intelligent precision targeting, micro-segmented activation. That's really the important piece. I'll take you through a high-level picture first. So you see that I'm kind of in something we call diagnostics dashboard, really not insights, really not reporting. It's more of a, what does my customer database look like today? So a few things here. You see that the data is pretty fresh. We have got micro batch cycle on it, so it updates every hour. So really as fresh as business can take it.
Real time. Sorry to stop you there. There's a request from the audience. If you could speak slightly slower, that would be helpful. Thank you very much, Pavel.
I will try. I am on my fourth coffee, so not so
easy. We do have time. Thank you.
Not so easy to manage. All right, so good call. So you see that the data is relatively freshly updated. Real-time use cases would be held effectively sorted completely separately, because we don't really typically as a humans, as a business users, we don't do ourselves in-stream real-time use cases. That's a machine that needs to show you a banner as soon as you have came onto the website in a personalized manner, right? People don't do that. So for user interface, this is perfectly fine. You see that we've got some 11,000 records here. I know you see that little writing under that, which tells you that there's an indication that this was actually originally across all of these databases, 37,000 customer profiles, then before profile stitching. Now, profile stitching is one of the kind of, I would say the kind of the heart and the core of the CDP. If you do it well, you are really able to resolve identity of customers across touch points. You can do it by different means of matching IDs that are identifiable as a PII, non-PII. You can create brand artificial ones. You can do fingerprinting. So there's really a lot of know-how that we put in here. That's effectively molded around the business rules that we see within the specific customer. For example, if you are trying to sign up for an account with Traveloka, you can't sign up twice with the same email address. If you are going to be opening a bank account with DBS, you probably can do that as long as you are opening it with two different NRICs. So you could, for example, as a family, use one email account. Completely normal practice. And that's just, tip of the iceberg. It gets way weirder in terms of what identity of customer means. So really important to do the duplication that is tailored to your business. This is what a lot of, that's absolutely not a market standard to do it in the way we do. So that's an interesting one. We've got about 30 attributes here, so really simple, small project, so not to overwhelm you with too much data. So I'm going to show you a few things here. If I scroll down at the bottom here, you will see that we are recognizing number of people, make this a little bit bigger, on a couple different database from coming in from different sources. So we have 8,500 in Marketo, we have 7,000 people in the website, and so on. Now, after the identity resolution, if I make a, this is a little bit in my way here, this one, if I show you and hover over this, I hope it's readable over the screen. You get to see where, for example, common questions we would get from marketers is, where do I have the biggest crossover from, where do I know the customers most? What are the 2 touch points that they use most that I know of and I can connect, right? So that's exactly answering precisely that. So that's this is a really a crucial one. So you see how simple the product is, but the logic behind it, the algorithmic processing, is really where we have burned, I would say, years and years of development time in this. So that's a crucial. You'll see in the attributes, so I'll show you one last thing here, and then we'll go into something a little bit more practical, will be the insight. So we are turning the attributes on that whole database into like this little dashboard, where we are basically showing you, what do we know about this 100% of your customer base right now? So this 11,000 here. You will see that we, for example, see that there's a product split across this, is that 26% people have a regular account, 18% of people have mortgage, and 13% of people have, in this database, have an investment product. And that this insight is available on something like 58% of the database overall, right? So you can use every attribute of a customer to also describe a customer, set of customers, or the entire database, which is really important, because when it comes to segmentation, we often get the question, okay, so I have my segment, I have designed it, I have the 3, 5, 10 rules that I want to put in one query, and I can go push it somewhere. But what else do I know about the segment, about these customers? What do they like? What do they buy? What do they search? What do they browse? What do they return when they return products and don't buy? So really a critical one. So I'll change the gears a little bit here to make this one tiny bit smaller. So I'll take you now into customer profile. So nothing super exciting here in terms of design, in terms of insights, but you will see, like in the same way you would be used to with your CRM, you would see a card of a customer with some engagement chart. So you see that this particular person is really engaged with the mobile banking app, but not so much with our email marketing communications through Marketo. You do see that we have them identified across all of the 4 or 5 sources that we have of data here. And then the interesting things is how it starts coming together like a puzzle. So you know this person on the website, you know what was the last entry page, last exit page that they had, when was their last visit. From Marketo, you know that they actually received a few emails, their open rate is 0.3. From mobile banking app, the product that they mostly use is the in-app payment. And typically in a business, why this is important is because you would know every single one of those things, but you would know them separately, and you would know that I am this person and I am this person. But as soon as you merge that picture into one really vivid image, this person literally comes alive. Of course, because we are cool like that, we build a timeline based on an immutable log of the customer data. So obviously every single customer action is logged in time and immutably stored, so persistent record. So you can really see that consequence. So now when we are talking about attribution, I'm really starting to enjoy this conversation, because it's coming down to, okay, so let's literally stalk this person as their entire customer journey that's now traceable across platforms, across offline, across online. You can totally track them down, and then it's obviously easy data interpretation if you have this granular, intimate knowledge of your customer. So that's down to a customer. Of course, for marketers, this is really more for an imagination, so you can see what do you know about customers, because one-to-one it's not going to be too practical. So the last piece, the most exciting one, is segmentation here, and I'll just cover a couple of things. Segmentation, we basically have an interface here where I can simply go in, and all I need to know is to write, read, and understand my business. So you see that I can name a segment, I can share it with people, collaborative features, and all that jazz. But most importantly, I can now start using all those attributes that I have. And like I said, we typically do have few hundreds. And I can start segmenting people by specific behavior. So for example, I can do from a mixed data source, I can choose first interaction. This is probably going to be a time. So you see that that's the data type is time. So we would have since and until. So I can start looking at people who only my brand has known for last 3 months. So that's a really simple segment. And I can start piling because we do have data prepared in this way and it's connected. So you would see that that's how we would go from here. One thing I'll show you before we go into any more detailed segmentation is a relatively recent addition we just put out, which is called Smart Segment, and it's basically an automatically set up for whenever a customer logs in to their platform for the first time, assuming they are bringing in some data that's correlating here, we would automatically start splitting their customer base into customer lifetime, level of interaction. We would have engagement across touch points, so EDM websites. So you could pick people who are really engaged on website and do something with them. That's obviously the premise. So any type of frequency, recency, type of predefined segmentation here for you. Now, let me take you into a little bit more, I guess, intricate scenario. So I've prepared one segment here where I'm going to open it up for you guys, which is a recent app users visited from social. So what you see here that I right now have 3 filters. I have 50 people from the overall 11,000, less than 1%. And you see that I'm saying that profile stitching bank mobile ID is known. So it's a mobile user app. We also have end condition. Their first interaction is from May 1st, 2020. So recent customer, recent acquisition, and also their UTM when they visited the website comes from socials, Facebook or Instagram. And this gives me, there's a transcript of the query, so I can check I'm accurate, and I can really pick this up into I can pick this up and push this into any type of activation platform I have prepared here. So you see that I could push these people back into Facebook as a custom audience, right? Really narrow and detailed. You see that I'm using 3 conditions here. So that's basically very simple, even though it's relatively advanced because it's using 3 different type of sources of data, but gives me a segmentation that can be extremely granular. The idea here would be you can start doing segments like your business is running an upsell campaign. It's not enough to say clients who live in Jakarta, push them a campaign. You probably want to remove people who have recently purchased. You probably want to remove people who have currently open ticket in a customer care because they probably have a problem and are not really keen to shop right now. So few things like that. So where that segmentation just gives you so much more flexibility to do. And of course, the key part here is bringing this data not necessarily to insights, but to action. And that's pushing it into the other activation platforms that you have, that your business has, whether this is customer care, this is your DMP or DSP for ad buying, this is your email marketing automation tool, that you have the capability. We typically say you don't have the data to do this right. So that's the kind of the gap we fill in the business. So I would actually really stop here, guys. I think we've been running way over time anyway. So I promised to keep it to 10 minutes, which I almost did. So that would be really just a quick demo of what type of things your first-party customer data can give you and do for you if you have it structured right, and emphasis on structured right and well cleaned. So that would be, I think from my side, really all.
Thanks a lot, Pavel. While we're waiting for questions to come in from the audience, I have one question. Can you share your experience? What are some of the biggest challenges for companies getting started on their first-party data journey or using a customer data platform like Myers?
Yeah, awesome question, obviously. Uh, we've kind of seen this with quite a few brands across really a lot of different industries, usually large organization. I think what's the trickiest piece is the fear of unknown, because you really often don't even know where to start. But that's precisely why you are bringing in external help as a consultant, or as a kind of a consultancy power technology. And I would say that usually the biggest obstacle we see is actually not data quality. I'll be very blatant, and I'll say that nearly all companies have data almost equally dirty and messy, but it's actually a data ownership. The larger the organization is, very often we see that the data sources, the tools that produce data, are being owned by different departments, and even just getting access to them is often really, really tricky. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Second, if I may kind of add one more, is I really see that business still struggles to communicate with IT, their needs and their requirements. That's definitely, I think there is a bit of a gap in alignment internally, which of course, if you are coming in as an outsider, is a lot easier to spot and to fix than if you are day in day out in your, fully immersed in your world as a business.
Then I have another question for you, Pavel. How long does it typically take for a business to see results when they start using a customer data platform?
Great question. We're always very transparent, and we try to kind of manage the expectation of clients right. This is not a magical solution that you put into the wall and suddenly the room is lit, right? It takes a while. It's typically quite dynamic. You will sometimes, I think what's always interesting is that the companies that work with us are often surprised how much data they actually have, especially in the little bit, I guess, non-IT traditional touch points like website. Like they look at, we've got 100,000 web visitors, and you kind of don't really understand what that amounts to over a year or two. So that's typically a question, but I think it all comes down to one aspect really. So doing the data engineering part and bringing in the different data sources into one place, that's your usual data integration project. You could call it a data lake if it wasn't specific about customer data. So every company has kind of partially done that as a part of their transformations effort and evolution effort. That's very normal. I think what makes the difference here is how well you are able to identify the customers across the different touch points, because that creates, if you imagine it as a net, if it's a lot more denser, meaning if you have multiple different identifiers, whether they are PII or completely artificial ones, and you can make all of these work together, you will learn the customer's identities across these touch points really, really far, because in that way we would be able to even stitch historical data oftentimes. So I would say, as my favorite answer in this space is, it depends, but there's a couple of surprising elements. So really about managing the expectations right.
Thank you, Pavel. Next question is, where do you see organizations jumping into using a CDP? So possibly which kind of industries? And at the same time, what challenges are holding others back?
So which industries are driving this? So kind of when I look at our customer base, I definitely see that it's the industries where saturation is really high, and brands are focusing on retention rather than acquisition at this point. So if you kind of think to your typical, Singapore, even though it's a small market in the regional context, everybody has a bank account since you were like 15 years old, right? So there is not that much of a room for growth, or if you're a telco provider, there's not that much of a room for growth, but you can focus on retaining your existing customers. And again, that intimacy, that perfect understanding of how they interact with you, how they use your products and services is really important. So I would say that these are generally the industries that we see and we focus on, because we do have some specifications that technologically gear us more towards regulated industries, so finance, telco, insurance, pharma, medical, is something that where we kind of focus a little bit more than being generalistic for the whole market. But we do see that that's definitely the case. What's holding them back is I think often not even knowing where to start. Like you somehow instinctively, a lot of smart leaders know that they have a mess or a big challenge in front of them, but they just don't know where to start. So I think from this perspective, it's always smart to work with external advisors, and that's not necessarily determined by how big your company is. I think we do that as a relatively small 30 people startup, out of Singapore as well. We bring in external people to advise if we are not sure internally. We don't have a strong sense of direction. So I think that's definitely a way to overcome that.
The next question is, someone in our audience is interested to find out how to enroll people to use and action on the data that's provided. I believe that's about access level to the platform.
Perfect. So I think actually it's exactly the keyword you said there is the access. We often with CDP, a lot of the use cases are advertising, and when you look at the typical, and this is a bit of a generalization, so obviously take it with a pinch of salt from me, but what I see in the market often is that when we talk about brand and advertising agency or media agency relationship, one of the biggest issue is that the any type of targeting really happens on the basis of description and like a oral passing of insights and information. I know very few brands that actually, other than the ones that we work with, that give access to their agencies, to their customer first-party data. It's most of the targeting occurs through the MPN. It's a shame that first-party data doesn't play a role in them, because if you are running a new advertising campaign for aggressive new discount, we really want to make sure that you are excluding your existing customers from seeing it, because otherwise you are up for big trouble with your existing customer base, right? So that data sharing and having a platform. So for example, in the environment where I show you, we have a specific availability to set up user roles in a way where I could be an agency user, and you as my brand customer could give me an access, but only to the segmentation part. So I could only see attributes and segments I create, and I could push them only into one designated destination. For example, if my agency covers your social ads through Facebook Business Manager, right? So meaning I would never go to touch, export, or download the data in any other way than directly into the Facebook audiences, which is completely secure, completely compliant. And I think this is really our heritage, where we started working with a finance clients. So we really were kind of security first CDP in this sense.
And the next question is a question that I believe is on a lot of people's minds. So it's related to sunsetting of cookies and importance of data privacy. So the question to you is, how do you see DMPs, CDPs evolve to meet marketers' demands for data-driven marketing?
Yeah. So this is something we talk about a lot, and I'm personally super interested in what does the post-cookie world look like. I think the advertising space is kind of gearing towards that, but we definitely see obviously a big push for brands to retain data, directly own it, control it, use it as they want, and not just rent it inside of a targeting tool like DMP. I often have a little bit of an issue with that, where using it is one thing, but having data, in my mind, is a reusable source. So if you use it for targeting, you could probably use it for other enrichment of the other activities that you have. So you need to be able to integrate it and not use it in a sort of some semi-isolated bubble somewhere. So that's a bit difficult piece. But for the cookie specifically, I think if there are brands that are not yet using first-party cookie and their own identifiers, would love to help them, talk to them, even just a friendly advice, because that's a critical from my perspective to start doing, and not rely on a third party analytics tool, which suffer currently massively from limited quality of data or even availability because of ad blockers, cookie lifetimes, and all that, especially in such heavy saturated markets with Apple devices like Singapore, where Safari is relatively prominent, and especially with like a high value target audiences. So that's probably a topic for a completely different talk if I can get another half an hour, but important one to raise for sure.
Yeah, I'm afraid we have come to time now, so I'd like to ask you to pick a winner, and there's two eligible questions in the audience. The first one was about access, and the second one was the last one we just talked about, so sunsetting of cookies, DMPs, CDPs.
Damn it, that's hard because those were two of my favorites actually. But I will pick the cookie one. I think it's more burning question and something brands need to pay attention. So just to kind of honor that sentiment, I will pick that one.
Great, thanks very much. Then congratulations, Vincent, for winning the voucher. And at this point, I want to thank all our speakers who joined us today to share their knowledge and their insights with us. And I also would like to thank the audience for tuning in and staying with us for 2 hours. I hope you enjoyed the session and that you will join us again next month. So stay tuned. We will post updates on Meetup. And please also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can watch the recording of each session afterwards. We will publish this week's recording in about a week's time. So feel free to subscribe and share. Also, thanks again to our sponsors, Decision Science, Happy Marketer, and eClerks for making these sessions possible. We hope that we can catch up in person with all of you again sometime soon. At the moment, we don't know when it's going to happen, so our digital sessions will continue. The benefit of that is that we also have participants from Malaysia and Indonesia joining. So there's always a benefit to every challenge. With this, I'd like to close today's session. Thank you again and see you next time.
Sorry, I just want to give a shout out to those two persons that makes it possible who are working from the back end. So thank you, Jeremy and Zach as well, who are actually managing this live stream from the back end. Thank you very much. So good night, everyone.